Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of The Crossroads. I am your host, Rashida Green, and this is the show for and about environmental justice and those who fight the fight with skin as melanated as the days are long. Knowledge is power, and we are breaking down stereotypes one episode at a time. So, welcome, everyone, or welcome back. I have a special guest in the studio with me who is doing his first podcast interview, and I'm going to let him introduce himself. But I'm joined by Colin Haynes today. Hello, sir. How are you?
Hello. It's a great privilege, Rashida. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
You aren't nervous, are you?
No, I'm not nervous at all.
Okay, don't be nervous. Don't be nervous. Okay. So the way we like to get the show started is by giving flowers. So this is the segment where we honor either someone in our lives or someone in the movement. I am going to break the rules today, but generally it's someone either that we admire and we want to acknowledge them. And for me today, randomly, I'm giving flowers to D'Angelo. I know that sounds nuts, but there's his sophomore album, Voodoo, it turned 20. It actually turned 20 in January but it's a great album. I randomly came across one of the songs, the Untitled, How Does It Feel? And was just like, oh my God, I remember watching this song in high school, which is, I'm totally telling on myself, but I'm giving him some flowers today because that album was amazing and it's still classic and it's still amazing to this day.
For me personally, when I think about what's happening in the world right now, two people come to mind for me, and one of them is Dr. Martin Luther King. I'm just a fan of his enthusiasm, his drive. And I was reading a book by Adam Grant on how nonconformists changed the world, and they were talking about Martin Luther King. He wanted to be a college president and a pastor. Someone who everything was stacked against him. From time to time, when we have the situations that are facing us today, like Black Lives Matter movement, they're out there. Why are they protesting? I say, hey, what happened if Martin Luther King said, you know what, I'm done with civil rights. Let's just stop here. Right. And we wouldn't have had this, or John Lewis, didn't take a crack in his head. A cracked skull, beaten in a bat in his head by a white police officer, we wouldn't have made so much progress with voting rights and civil rights and equal housing and stuff like that. The other person I find very interesting at this point in time is Abraham Lincoln. He's president of the States, and he actually passed the Emancipation Proclamation Act. Now, the Emancipation Proclamation Act, I believe, it wasn't to give freedom of Black people, rather, but in order to get freedom for Blacks, we had to first break up the Confederates, and then that paved the way moving forward to end slavery, to eradicate Jim Crow. And so we've seen it took almost 100 years after that to make it happen in this republic. But some of his work that he started, I believe, actually started that fire, started to ignite that struggle. And so he holds a great place in my heart.
Okay, that's good. You make D'Angelo sound like a bum. That's okay.
No. I'm actually gonna listen to the I'm gonna listen to the album.
Ooh,
I like music.
Okay.
I'm gonna take you up on it.
Okay. It's quite piquant.
Classic.
It's a good album. It's a classic. It's a classic album. So
wonderful.
For our conversation today, we're talking about COVID-19, and we are also going to delve into Guyana, which, for folks that don't know, that is a country in South America. And we're going to talk a lot about that as well, and kind of draw some parallels between the United States and Guyana as well. But before we get there, we're gonna talk about COVID, because something that Colin did not mention is that he has a master's degree in public health, and he's about to put that bad boy to use. So, sir, what the hell? Like where do we stand with COVID? You know, how many cases? What's going on? Give us the deeds.
So currently we have about 22 million cases globally, with 789,000 folks that have died. We also have about roughly over 14 million cases that have been recovered. So if you want to know particularly how many people have COVID, currently what you do is you add the number of deaths and the number of who've recovered, and minus that from, or subtract it rather, from the current cases, and you'll have something around 7 million current infections around the world. Now, in the United States, we have over 5.5 million cases. We have 173,000 deaths, which means that we are the highest in terms of number of people who have died. Roughly about 2 million people have recovered so far in 50 states. And so also, when we started COVID, I used to track the data every day. COVID started, we roughly had COVID mostly in about 50 territories. Now it's spread across to over 188 countries and territories around the world. So it's now become, it's become a very widespread pandemic. I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday, and I think we were saying that this is like a nonstop hurricane. It's just never going to stop. So it's an unfortunate thing, but it calls for a lot of introspection and work to be done.
So it's just, I guess I'm upset because as someone whose experience has been very much so in a way privileged, because I haven't had to go out for work. I've been able to stay in the house and work and do what I need to do. And just from my engagement of going outside and, seeing what's going on, is that a lot of people are not wearing masks, and it seems like there's other countries that have completely knocked this out of the park, have no new infections, or are able to catch them and isolate folks and get them treated. And it just seems like America is just not doing that. I mean, from a global perspective, and then also let's talk about this raggedy ass America too. Like, are the cases going down? Like what's going on?
Yeah, actually, that's some good news. So the cases have decreased. I've actually was looking at data today. Whew. And on July the 20th, which is a month ago, there was 57,777 cases, right? So there was a daily average or moving average of cases of 66,000. That was a regular between that interval of 57, 66,000. Now, over the last month, within the last couple of days rather, we've decreased to about 39,000 cases with a moving average of 48,000. So in the United States, it has gotten better. So there's been a 32% reduction of cases. But like I said, there's still a greater number of work left to be done in terms of increasing testing and reducing the mortality rate, which is an interesting thing to talk about.
The mortality rate specifically?
Yes.
What's interesting? What makes that? Well, first of all, because not everybody may know that term. So what does mortality rate mean?
Right. So in public health and epidemiology, which is the study of disease and study of trends of disease, we want to be able to know how many people are dying of a specific case or a specific cause in population. So particularly when we're talking about the mortality of COVID-19, we're actually talking about how many people are dying with COVID per population per 100,000 people. So what the marker for that is in the top, the numerator is number of cases, the denominator is your population. So it's taking, we have 5,545,247 cases, and you're actually dividing that by 330 million, and then you're multiplying that by 100,000. We're seeing that we have a mortality rate of 53 per every 100,000. So every 100,000 Americans, there are 53 COVID cases.
Okay.
Right? Mm-hmm. Which is pretty much high, I think looking at the data for other countries, there are a few countries that have a higher, it's upwards to about 60 or 70. We're right up there with many other countries in terms of mortality rate. So far, in addition to that, we've done about 70 to 74 million tests. And from those tests we've done, you could see, if you do the math, if you take the number of positive cases divided by how much tests done, you have what's called a positivity rate, right? So that positivity rate right now, based on CDC numbers, and I've calculated as well, it's 9%. But what's also interested in that is the state of California, New York, Texas, and Florida account for 30%, 38% of all testing that is conducted in the United States. And if you've been reading the news, you would see as well that those also account for almost 30% of the cases that we have worldwide. Another key indicator, and I don't want to bore too much with all of these epidemiological public health terms, but
we're nerding out.
There's a term called case fatality. So it's my favorite public health indicator because, and you see, you're laughing at me
because it's nerdy. Keep going.
Because what it says, right? It says that of the number of people who have COVID, you take the number of people who've died from COVID divided by the total cases, and you get a percentage. If you multiply by 100, you have a percentage. Now, that percentage in America is 3%. So 3% of all people who have contracted COVID have died from the disease.
Well, that was like a quick lesson in statistics, but also general overview of epidemiology. It's for everybody. You see that?
My epidemiology professor would be proud of me.
So proud.
I wasn't the best at the subject.
Whoops. That's okay. Like when I was in school, I wasn't very good at organic chemistry, but like now I got it. Like I got it now. So I'm like, my teachers will be proud of me. Huh?
That was one of my favorites.
Really?
Chemistry.
Yeah. It grew on me. Yes, I had to take it more than once, but yeah, it definitely grew on me. So, So the last time we had, and when I say last time, let me clarify. So prior to the Great Recession, of course, which we know happened around 2008, 2009, we had another significant financial and economic crisis in our country. And out of that, we had the New Deal.
Yes.
And you and I have talked about a few things. Obviously, I think we're definitely going to talk about like what the New Deal is, but also wanting to bring this into the conversation to begin to answer, if we can, if something like that would be helpful in what we're currently facing. So talk about the New Deal. Give the children a history lesson, and what maybe is your perspective on how likely we are to have something like that, or what that could potentially look like.
Well, I am extremely thankful for this discussion because when we had this discussion about the potential of the New Deal, I've actually just finished reading a book by Anthony Badger that talked about President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He's the 32nd president of the United States. And so the New Deal was a myriad of policies that were implemented. In 1933, in 1929, actually, the stock market crashed. And with that, the next 4 years, President Herbert Hoover, he actually had a tough time keeping America economy intact. There was massive surplus of food. There was a lot of bank holidays. The bank didn't have monies. People were foreclosing on their homes. Workers were out of jobs. And so Franklin Delano Roosevelt ran and won on the premise that he will do better. And so he said in one of his fireside chats, the first one, that I present to you a New Deal. I love Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He's my favorite American president. I actually 2 days ago was in D.C. and I had a cousin in town, and I take every person that I give them a tour of D.C. I take them to the FDR Memorial
Oh, Lord.
because it shows a time in America, and I'm a history buff too,
Mhm.
Rashida. So um, the goal of the New Deal was to provide relief to Americans, right, in the form of aid. So basically, they give them aid and unemployment for the poor.
Right.
We had a recovered economy, so that happened through job creation to jumpstart economic activity, and also they had to reform the financial system. So the banks, um, you had to reduce the bank holidays or put some banks into holidays, restructure some banks, provide mortgage relief for Americans who are losing their homes. And also at the same time, this all started out with the stock market crash. So everything was
Right.
driven by the market. So the
Mhm.
stock market of itself had to be regulated. So one of the things that came out of that was the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, because
Mm.
people were buying and selling stock. It wasn't a clear regulation or regulatory in place. And so when regulations are not in place, what you see happen is humans, we have a tendency to find loopholes and things spiral out of control.
Yeah.
Now, what most Americans don't know, there were actually two New Deals, right?
I did
So
not know
the
this.
first 100, yes, so the first 100 days was the first New Deal, right? That focused on agricultural adjustment. So you actually had a case where the president of the United States said, we'll pay you money, tell the farmers, we'll pay you money to keep your crops in your silos, in your barns. Because what was happening is that there was so much of, there was a greater supply, greater
Mm.
supply. And so what that did is it drove the prices down, right? Because supply demand is how the economics of the world work, right?
Right.
So when something becomes in higher demand, the price tends to go up. But when it's in a higher supply, the price tends to go down. And so he told the farmers, look, we'll pay you to keep your wheat, to keep your corn, to keep your vegetables or whatever in place. So you had that in place. Now, one of the things that America was plaguing America at the time was electricity. Electricity was high. We were using coal, and so FDR said, "Look, in order to develop this economy, we need to have sustainable and we need to have renewable electricity." So he instituted what's called the Tennessee Valley Authority (TVA), which provide for a hydroelectric plant
Mhm.
um, along the Tennessee River. And so that was a means to increase electricity. And with increased electricity and electricity being cheaper, you had more manufacturing jobs. You have more companies that are investing in the economy. Um, Another thing that was actually interested in the first 100 days was ending prohibition. Alcohol was illegal,
Illegal.
right? And so, the government never made any money from alcohol. It was all an underground bootleg society.
Mhm.
And so, by ending prohibition, he actually brought more money into the treasury through taxes.
Right.
Another thing was the National Industrial Recovery Act, and that was to protect workers. You had workers who were working long hours, not being paid correctly, being exposed to so much of great danger. And so in the first New Deal, you had this as a signature policy. In addition, the final one was the Glass-Steagall Banking Act, which is essentially to regulate the bank. So, like I said before, um, you know, there was the major banks that was surviving, but in small communities where people relied on the banks for their everyday livelihood, the banks were suffering. They weren't able to provide mortgages. They were not bringing in monies, and interest rates were out of touch. So that was the first New Deal. The second New Deal was a little more social in nature. What it did, it provided for two programs. One was Workers Progress Administration, was called WPA. That provided jobs for the unemployed people. So you had from welders to artists to musicians, they were put back to work. You also set up an unemployment insurance system. So the unemployment insurance we see now currently that's implemented by states are a product of Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Hmm.
Also, Social Security the pension for older folks, disabled people, and their children, especially when folks, they pass on, they can have benefits for their children.
Right.
This all came out of what's called the second New Deal. So there's the first 100 days, which was immediate things that he had to do to jumpstart the economy. And then from there on, as he progressed in his presidency, many different other improvements. Now, one of the things that I'm a big proponent for the New Deal, but one of the things, as much as these were signature programs and they were instituted and they provided relief, the effects were very short term. So they were only to boost the economy in short term. Now, when we're talking about COVID-19, I believe that COVID-19 has shook the foundations of our healthcare system and of our society.
Agreed.
And so what COVID-19 has shown us is that there were things that were at the fundamental base that wasn't right about society and needs to be fixed, right?
Yes.
I've looked at some statistics to back up for you, particularly in the African American community. Blacks are dying from COVID at 84 per every 100,000. So just like how the United States numbers for mortality rate is 53, Blacks are 1.5% more than that established mortality rate. So every 100,000 Black people, there's 84. That's 2.2 times more than a white person, which their numbers are 34 per every 100,000. Blacks are most likely to die from COVID-19, like I said, 2.4 times more. COVID-19 has killed 34,000 Black people, and that's 22% of all cases that are deaths rather have been accounted by Blacks who've died from COVID-19. So what this tells us is that we're not getting it right with the social determinants of health. We're not getting it right with the environment, with the economic development, with our healthcare system, with our political disparities, and it's affecting not only Blacks as well, but if you look at 70% or 80% of all cases, rather, they either belong to Blacks, Native Americans, or Latino or Latinx, as they call them now. So it's shown us that the minorities and even the Asian community as well are more likely to die from COVID-19 because if you look at particularly African American communities, they have the least improved infrastructure, roads, access to healthy eating, fresh vegetables, parks, jobs, way of life. And so, we have some of the highest incidents of, or rates rather, of cancer, diabetes, of hypertension. And so COVID, as we know it, does thrive a lot on these pre-existing conditions, or in public terms, we call comorbidities. And so it affects the population. So with the Black Lives Matter movement, it's now calling for us to be able to say, look, every state, every city, every county, and the federal government has to do more to empower people of color with essential tools to be healthy and to be happy. And it cannot be something that is just temporarily, but it has to be long-term, because COVID has shown us the deficiencies in our system, in our country, on a long-term basis.
Yes, absolutely. Oh my God, absolutely. And the thing is that there are countries, I believe, right, that have been successful in controlling and I think also eradicating the virus. And it just seems like the US is just not really trying to do that. And so what have the other countries done to successfully eradicate the virus and or just reduce the number reduce the spread?
And that's a great question. What I've had those questions asked for me a few times. What countries have done, they've actually have a better healthcare apparatus than us. That is, they have universal healthcare, which basically provides essential services to everybody. So whether you're rich or poor, you're gay or straight, you have an opportunity to go to a doctor. And if you're just north of the border or you're south of the border here, it's the example. And what people do from time to time, um, they have this way of demeaning these countries that have universal healthcare system.
Oh, yeah.
It's a very good system. And what ended up happening is that, for instance, I talked to my friend who works for the NHS in the UK, and the system is so good that people actually go there for a cough and a cold. So people who get the cough or the cold, they go there. And so you have somebody with cancer, and then you have somebody with a cough and a cold, or both in the emergency room. And so that's where some of the deficiencies happen in the system. But as a whole, it's a great system. It offers, like I said, if you have cancer, if you have a cough, if you have a cold, whatever you have, your health issues are, you have access to professional, to specialists, to general practitioners, regardless of race, color, or status. Another thing that countries have done well, and if you were watching the news, you would see that in places like Italy, Germany, France, and UK, and for Europe and New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, which I'm going to talk about them and eradicate COVID, is they have done lockdowns and they've been very strict about it.
Yeah.
I was told that, in Italy, you couldn't even go and buy bread. You couldn't even go to a grocery store when it started because they locked everything down.
Yeah.
And they started to open up gradually just, to provide food for people, but everything else was shut. When we watching the news, we saw Madrid, we saw Rome, we saw many of these European cities were empty, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the lockdown, it did work. And New Zealand, one of my favorite countries, one of my favorite prime ministers, Madam Prime Minister, she's had New Zealand COVID-free for the last 100 days.
Wow.
And these are some of the same things that she's done. Look, most of the countries, they've listened to the scientists, they've followed the science, they demonstrated political will, they did the lockdowns, their society, they followed it as well, because in as much as government is doing, they have to have equal responsibility for every single citizen of this country to follow those guidelines. They wore their masks when they were outside. I have some family there in Barbados. They were telling me that you come out based on your last name. So whenever it's Green, G, or it's Haynes, H, you probably, you will be able to hang out at the same time because we have last names that are close. So that's the only time of the week you can come out. If you don't want to do that, then you get locked up. You go to jail. And these are some of the things that actually work. So there had to be some enforcements being done. And New Zealand has been COVID-free, Papua New Guinea, the Micronesian Islands, the Marinara Islands. Many of these little Pacific countries have been COVID-free, and they also have smaller populations as well.
While you're giving me these facts about the countries that have eradicated the virus, like New Zealand, all I can think about is that line outside of Red Lobster with 1 million people in Pennsylvania somewhere, and people were really coming to blows for cheddar biscuits. And I'm confused. And hearing that, just knowing that from a federal level, that there was, well, not that there would have been anyway, but that there was nothing to say federally, we are locking all of this down and we are not letting folks out or letting states decide what they think is the best move to make. We are going to do this so that it's a universal across the board. Every state is reading from one sheet of music, and that did not happen. And that's why it's been a dumpster fire pretty much since March. So I just wanted to bring that into the conversation.
And you're right. So in addition to that, many countries also did massive contact tracing and testing. And like I said, the political will was there. But in the United States, we have only conducted about 74 million tests so far. Many scientists, particularly Harvard Institute, they're of the opinion that we have to get up to 300 million tests done because there are 300 million people. So if you want to be able to ascertain that 95% of your population doesn't have COVID, you have to have as much as testing done. We barely, I think we got up to about 2 million tests per day or something like that now.
Mm-hmm.
But we're way far from the 5 million daily benchmark. So both state, local government were not meeting those benchmarks. One of the deficiencies in this COVID response has been there hasn't been a concerted, planned, and well executed federal plan. If you look at the flu that happened in 2018, which is probably the most deadliest flu epidemic that we had in many years, there was a federal plan. There was a pandemic plan for the flu. It was followed. The CDC prepared it. They worked with the city, county, state, and at the federal level to implement them. What you have now happening in the era of COVID is you have every state is having its own plans. They're having their own objectives. So there's not a really firm plan in place. There's not really firm objectives and goal. And if you're a Republican state, you have a different way of going about things. If you're a Democratic state, you have a different way. Particularly you look at states like New York and California, they've demonstrated the ability to control the virus.
Yes.
They've listened to the scientists. They've followed the science. My home state of Maryland, has done a tremendous job as well. And we have a Republican governor as well, but we've listened to the science. We've done the lockdown restrictions. Many of our folks all of our population they've been wearing their masks. And so it has helped. I cannot agree with folks who talk about freedom and liberty when it comes to making themselves safe. Biblically, I remember there's a scripture that says all things are lawful, but not all things are expedient. Mm-hmm. So I can go out there and jump out into the Atlantic Ocean, but if I don't know how to swim, I'll die, right? So in as much as we know that we have the freedom to do stuff, we know that if we don't follow guidelines, if we don't have the capabilities to execute them, then it doesn't help us. So wearing a mask actually prevents us from drowning in the Atlantic Ocean. Wearing a mask prevents us from dying. It prevents us from spreading the disease. And that is what we need to do. That has to happen in Florida. That has to happen in Texas. That has to happen in the Midwest. Yes. And one other thing that I'm not happy with this current administration and their effort is utilizing the latest scientific data. If you go to CDC, if you go to NIH, if you go to the U.S. Surgeon General, there's so much data, there's so much information. I'm preparing for this podcast, and there's just a myriad of information to look at. And I'm like, wow, if the White House was looking at this information more objectively, and we were seeing the trends, and we were making decisions based on these trends, then we would have a different response. And
look at God.
And then come a vaccine, right? The vaccine is on the way. It's not going to be here for another year or so.
Yeah.
But we have to ensure that when the vaccine gets here, because it's going to be a 2-dose vaccine, that we've done enough clinical trials so that we can deliver long-term immunity. Because what you see happening is we're trying to rush vaccinations. We're trying to rush clinical trials.
Yes.
And in the process, a lot of things can go wrong. We can end up killing people more than we help them.
Yeah. And I want to pull the car over really quickly to talk about this vaccine. And I want to do that for a couple reasons. One is I partially don't think people understand that they don't understand like vaccine development. I think the other side of this as well is that I think there's a lot of fear about the vaccine. We've heard, I believe there were some scientists in France who were making a comment about, just go test it on some Black folks in Africa, and we have a very real and realized fear of the medical system. And I've been talking about the book Medical Apartheid by Harriet Washington, and I definitely want to have like a dialogue about that book as well. But I think that based upon what I have read thus far and what I have seen and experienced or seen and heard, I can say that I'm a little nervous or concerned about this vaccine. It's just like you said, and I think people, the public, are not aware of the time that it actually takes to go through clinical trials. It can take years. It can take the process of manufacturing a drug substance or a drug product takes time. And I don't think folks get that. So in your experience, are you also finding that, or from what you're hearing or what you're reading, that folks are also apprehensive about this vaccine?
Yeah, I myself, I'm apprehensive about a vaccine.
Yeah.
In that, not because, based on public health history, vaccines have been very effective. We've reduced measles, we've eradicated polio. We've basically mitigated a lot of harm and grief, the diseases caused by vaccines. But also scientifically, vaccines have their process, right? So
Yes.
making a vaccine goes through many different processes, right?
Yes.
So like I said before, the clinical trials, usually they start with animals, and then
Mm-hmm.
it goes through ethics review by the institute, the board of ethics, and then it goes through until we start trying them out in humans, which we have what's called a cohort number of people, and then we compare it with many different cohorts, and these things take time.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly, we've had COVID started here in March of 2020. I don't think we can have a vaccine until March of 2022. And I think that that's the bare minimum.
I agree.
And I wouldn't be hesitant to take a vaccine before then, because I don't believe it would have all of the necessary efficiencies. And like I said, I thought, initially we thought it was going to be like a one-dose vaccine, but it's going to be a two-dose vaccine. And also we want to ensure that when these vaccines are given, then they will be able to build immunity. We've seen that patients who recovered from COVID have now a 3-month immunity cycle. So without a vaccine, you have 3 months that you can go without getting COVID once you've recovered from it. So once you've had it once, you get the antibodies, you have 3 months, right? So designing a vaccine has to be able to deliver more than that 3 months.
Oh
So
my
it
God.
has to be able to deliver at least a year, 2 years, or whatever. What I would like to see in an ideal vaccine is COVID has different strains, so it can protect us from those different strains that exist within our community. And so just like the flu vaccine, when we believe that those strains mutate, they will change, because they will happen. That's the nature of diseases. They mutate, they change by environment, temperature, all these kind of things, right? So we want to make sure that there's a vaccine can do that.
Now I want to shift gears just a smidge, just a hair, and talk about Guyana. It is your origin story. It's the country or place of your birth. Talk to me about it. I think people maybe know where it is, but it's in South America. It's like right at the top right, if you're looking at South America. So that's so terrible. But talk to me about some history of Guyana, because of course, they were colonized by the Dutch, and that sounds pretty on par with every other place in the transatlantic slave trade.
Yeah, so Guyana is the only English-speaking country in South America. All right, it's the home of a multiracial, multinational group of people with a rich history, both social-politically and economically. We had gained our independence in 1966 after turmoil ensued over our constitution, because back in 1953, we actually started the process of attaining independence. But before that, the country of Guyana, as we know it, was first, it began its colonization with the first sightings were the Spanish. So the Spanish were around, 1499. And then in the 1619, we saw the Dutch West Indian Company, which is a trading company. They came and they settled in a region in Guyana. We have as a county, it's called Berbice, right? So it's pretty much one of the oldest counties in the country. They remained there in Guyana, and they built some amazing infrastructure, like our sea defenses that protect us from flooding. It goes back to the Dutch. We have forts, lookout points. Villages are named by the Dutch and buildings as well. Just to tell you, the capital city of Georgetown, is one of the best laid out cities in the Caribbean. You can go anywhere around Georgetown, Guyana, without going around in right angles. And so, what that actually was supposed to do was supposed to minimize or mitigate drain flooding. So you had all these cities, all these in the cities, all these their drains bisecting right angles. The streets are bisecting right angles as well. There's maybe 3 or 4 main streets that go vertical, and then there is so many streets that come down horizontal, and so it forms that checkered form. If you're looking at a map, you'll see it. And so, thanks to the British, we've had amazing infrastructure. We're below sea level,
Right.
make us very susceptible to flooding.
Yes.
And so it's absolutely important, like I said, to have the sea fences and to have our drainage and irrigation of the land important as well. So after the Dutch began to set up all these things in motion, the British then came and, in 1814, they fought the Dutch and they occupied Guyana. And so between 1814 to roughly about 1953, where we began the process of starting to gain our independence, Guyana was ruled by British.
And I'm huffing because it just, the thing is that I've started to realize about countries that have had to gain their independence from Britain is that it's taken a significant amount of time. And it was funny. One time I was watching the Olympics when, everyone's coming in and they're announcing all the countries. And I noticed how so many flags looked like the British flag. And I was like, man, they were really out here just enslaving the girls. Like just, and I just wanted to kind of bring that into the conversation too, just a little sprinkle. But what are some of the parallels between the US and Guyana from your perspective?
Okay, so since we were talking about COVID-19, I think we couldn't go too far without talking about some of the parallels, because like I said, COVID has really shaken our healthcare system. Currently we have 777 cases in Guyana. We have 27 deaths. We have roughly about 381 people who've recovered. Our mortality rate is lower than the United States, so we don't have a big 50 number, which is 50 per 100,000. We have 3, so every 100,000 people, 3 are dying. Now, actually, we only have 780,000 people. So in Guyana, so that of itself is a lot. So we're talking anywhere around 27 people who have died from COVID-19. But one of the things that I've looked today, and it actually bothered me a bit, and I'm gonna try my best to get this over to some of the health professionals or people in high places there, is that our case fatality rate is higher than the United States. We're roughly up there about 3.5%. And that happens because, small population, many cases, many deaths. So the numerator is kind of a little larger and the denominator is small. So you get that effect. There is some similarities within our country. Our country is really different in how we go about our way of living. We were more occupied or ruled by the British, so we tend to have a lot of the British norms and customs. We also are consider ourselves Caribbean, even though we're in South America. We're not an English-speaking country in South America, and so we recognize more with our Caribbean friends like Trinidad and Jamaica and the island countries. But we've also had a two-party system, just like the United States. So we gained our independence in 1966. Independence in 1964, there was an election, right? Before that, in 1953, our founding fathers, Dr. Cheddi Jagan and Forbes Burnham, they were all belong to one party. So there's one national party. And so they had a squabble over, pretty much running the country, whatever the case may be. And so Forbes Burnham, at that time, he's the Afro guy, and Cheddi Jagan, Dr. Cheddi Jagan was an Indo guy, Indian descent.
Mm-hmm.
They separated the leader of the People's Progressive Party, and
PPP.
Barnum, he went on to the PPP, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and he went on to form the PNC, which is called the People's National Congress. And so, in the 1964 election, he won. He governed Guyana from 1964 to 1985 until his death, so about 21 years. And then the party also can continue to keep in power for until 92, when we had elections, and then for 23 years, the PVP was in power until 2015, where we've had a change with a coalition government, which
Mm-hmm.
included the PNC and the Alliance for Change, AFC, which is a multinational party. They ruled for the last 5 years. We just had elections. It was a very lengthy process. It took us 5 months to get the results. And the PPP is
Damn.
back in power. Yes.
Wait, the PPP won again?
Yes, they're back in power.
Damn.
One of the similarities also with Guyana is that we're now a petrol producing state. So as of 2019, December 2019, ExxonMobil has begun drilling in our waters. We have roughly, I think, about 8 billion barrels of oil, light sweet oil, which is pretty much one of the envies of the world. As with oil as well, we're finding great difficulties with keeping our national interests intact. And also there's a great debate about how do we use this resource, oftentimes that's been looked at in a negative sense, as a resource curse, because what it's done to countries like Nigeria and Guinea and Chad,
Yes.
and how we're now able to use that to better the lives of our Guyanese people. And so that's right now where we're at. And in terms of, the production activities have begun. Well, in 2015, they've found the first oil, and now it's time to continue the discovery. And we've been making a significant amount of money from our findings so far. We already have over $100 million, within the last couple of months.
So I think we have officially come to the crossroads, which is the part of the show where we bring all of these things together. And in order to do that, I have to bring into this conversation that what you're talking about as far as the recent discovery of oil. So first of all, crude oil is non-renewable. It's a non-renewable source of energy. It comes from millions of years, and removing it and using it contributes to climate change. And, when we're talking, and also that this is also an example of an extractive economy, and it's not to shade Guyana, it's just to say that this is an example of taking a resource that is non-renewable and exploiting it. And that's exactly what happened in Nigeria with Shell. I think it's Shell and maybe Chevron. And hell, what happened? We could talk about the oil spills that have happened here, the ones that have happened in Florida, Texas. Like these are major problems. And again, still just kind of similarly to what the New Deal implied, we have to find sustainable methods for maintaining our economy. So that's what to put that out there. And kind of talking about some of the environmental impacts, Guyana also relies very heavily on agriculture. What are some of the environmental, what y'all doing down there? What's some of the environmental impacts that are going on in Guyana?
Right. So I also want to talk about the oil find because yes, it's a non-renewable resource, but we haven't sat down and relied solely on oil as being that. So
right.
The current government has proposed years ago, before they came out, the government was for us to turn to renewable resources such as wind, solar, and we have a great deal of solar, particularly in the rural areas with the natives, the Amerindians, or the indigenous people, rather, should I call them? I want to call them the indigenous people. The indigenous people in their communities, we've empowered them with solar panels. There are talks about having a wind farm. Right now, the current government is talk about bringing back to the table a hydroelectric project. So like the Hoover Dam, which was another Great Depression project, to be able to provide clean energy for people, and it's going to generate something around 160 megawatts. Now, here's the idea. The idea is that right now we are burning fossil fuels to generate electricity.
Right.
And it's coming at a heavy tag in Guyana because we didn't have oil then, right? Now, with oil and gas, because the gas sits on top of the oil in the rock, right? We can take that gas and we can get it on stream online on shore, and then we can convert that into generation and to power, and that's a little also that's cleaner as well, natural gas, right? Because it gets released back into the
it's
environment.
Still trash. Yeah, it's still trash though.
It's not as bad. It's not as bad as
It's not as bad as coal, and I know that's
as bad as coal.
Yeah,
it's not as bad as burning oil, right?
Yeah.
But like I said, we haven't really, and that's going to bring a lot of jobs to Guyana. So it's going to now bring more manufacturing jobs. Like I said, there's going to be a time where when the hydro project kicks in, it's going to dry up. We have dry spells, dry seasons in Guyana. And when that happens is that the water flow will decrease. And so now we'll have a backup plan. Now we'll be able to kick in the gas generators or the wind or the solar to be used in different communities. So I'm very proud that we have these big ticketed items of sustainability on the table. It is now our job to do that. And in talking about the agriculture industry, this is agriculture industry. I grew up on a farm in Guyana. I spent I have a kitchen garden right now that I'm doing in the backyard. And so, agriculture is very important for me. I think it's one of the most important things. I think as any young person or anyone in the country should be thinking about how do we create or have food security, because especially in COVID, it has shown us that we need to, to have a sustainable food source. And so in the interim, when we have this gas come on board, it will also stimulate manufacturing. So it'll stimulate us being taking our goods. So we've been a country that's been producing rice. We have one of the largest rice exporters in the world. We export sugar, although it's not very profitable for a nation right now because we're producing it at a higher price than we sell it.
Right.
In addition to that, we have livestock and also seafood. There's so much of great opportunities to use this resource to be able to power industries. And like I said, alongside alternative fluids, few alternative energy sources as well, we can be able to drive a cleaner environment. We've also have Norway that's on board and said, look, we have the largest untapped rainforest in the world. And so Norway says, you keep your rainforest as the lungs of the world, and we'll continue to pay you large sums of money to be able to induce that into alternative sources. So we've taken some of those monies to be able to put it into our hydroelectric projects or sustainability projects. So like I said, we're not sitting down relying only on oil and gas, but there is a good short-term benefit of the gas to help us to be able to sustain our economy while we build alternative sources.
That sounds so much better. And thank you for politely getting me together and coming for Guyana and y'all's oil.
Trust me, you're not the first. There's people from all over the world.
Leave that oil alone. But when so you're saying that Norway said, hey, you guys keep doing what you're doing, keep the rainforest going, and we'll contribute to you. Is that it?
Yeah. So there is actually, if you look it up, there is what's called the RED project. So our former president Barry Jagdeo, he came up with a proposal a few years ago, and he pitched it to, the world, and said, hey, we'll keep our rainforest together. We'll reduce deforestation. We'll plant more trees,
Mm-hmm.
and you guys will give us an incentive for it, because what it generates is what's called carbon credits. Carbon
Yes,
credits are
yes,
very
yes.
important,
Mm-hmm.
because we that keeps you as one of the the lesser pollutants of the world. I'm sure the United States and China wouldn't be high in that list,
Oh yes,
but
that's their number one and two.
they're one and two, right? So what we've been able to do is to say we'll keep our forests pristine, almost untouched. We do log in as well. We do cut down, but Guyana is so big that it looks on the map. It's the size of England, and most of the people just live alongside the coast and adjacent to the coast where I was born and raised. But all the out of the country, the rest of the country, some maybe 70, 60,000 square miles, it's all rainforest. And so
Wow.
when you find into Guyana, it's this green, pristine, you don't see anything but rainforest. Beautiful at more in the mornings to look at. And so we have all the rivers and stuff. But like I said, the Norwegians, if you do that, we do it. What I would like to see in addition to that, and I'm happy we're having this conversation, because climate change is an area where I am, I am not very knowledgeable, but I'm passionate about, because I believe that something must be done to protect our environment. And I feel
Yes.
it starts with us. It starts with how we treat the environment, how well we do with our everyday life, turning off the lights, or, using less power, saving in many different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Because what that does, another thing for us in Guyana is monitoring the levels of the sea, because climate change now,
Yes.
we've been having the
Yes.
sea coming over the wall, and so that's causing flooding and all these different things. And so also we have to look at now, how do we keep our environment clean, sanitation, littering, not littering, and that kind of
Mm-hmm.
stuff. On an agriculture side, climate change has affected us agriculturally.
Mm-hmm.
So in some cases, when you have a breach of the sea defense, or a breach of a dam, it floods the crops
Yes.
for farmers, and it causes a lot of issues.
Mm-hmm.
So, those are things that they challenge. And then heavy rainfall is another thing, particularly for cash crops or
Yes.
vegetables and fruit. It affects their ability to continue to grow. But nevertheless, what I love about my country, what I love about our people, is that resilient spirit. We never give up. We have many different challenges. We have social, economic, and political challenges that I like to talk about, where we need to have a modernization. We need to have an institutionalization of our industries in Guyana, and how we do business, how we improve healthcare, agriculture, science and technology, and security. But our people, they are the epitome of how they move forward day to day in the struggle, and they're doing extremely well, and they're doing extreme things for our country, great things for our country.
That's awesome. And as we're coming to the close, one more teeny question. If we had to have a new deal, and maybe we can incorporate the Green New Deal, but if we had a Green New Deal, and if we could do it here, or if maybe Guyana could pick it up and incorporate it, what do you think would be some of the programs we should consider doing, or what are some of the things that we need to do away with or enhance as part of this new deal?
Right. So if there was to be a new deal, I would like to have my plan to be executed. So for years, I've been talking about a social, political, and economic revolution, right?
Mm-hmm.
In social, we have to look at some of the things that have beset us for so long. So like I was mentioning, our healthcare system, our environment, our socioeconomics, it has to improve our foundations of our society. We have to be a more loving, caring, more inclusive society. Healthcare has to be more universal to everybody, not those who have money or those who have jobs. What happens to people who don't have jobs? What happens to people
Right.
who lose their jobs? What happens? And this is what the biggest debate is right now. So we need to also be able to get to that point where we can provide for people socially, where mothers don't have to worry about childcare. They don't have to worry about where the next meal comes from, because we have a security net that is placed around them. And also elderly people, what is their health care, or they're going to retire, their benefits have to be preserved.
Right.
Economically, I'd like to see big, bold investments in manufacturing. I also like to see a rise in small business and entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly in Guyana, I would like to see young entrepreneurs being able to have an idea, take it to a bank, get funded for it. And so they'll be able to build and develop a business model that's going to help them, and also come up with innovative ways. In the field of science and technology, there's so much of scope in STEM, and in our education system, we have to build those capacities. What I've always called for is what's called an institutional strengthening. And so institutions exist to do three things: education and training, research and development, and delivery or quality assurance, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have to ensure that, whether it's healthcare, agriculture, science and technology, security, whatever we do, whatever service we're delivering, we ensure that they're continually improvement based on education, research, which points to us the gaps, and then we deliver it with the highest level of customer service and um, and quality assurance that are available. And politically, we'd like to see more representation from people, more young people involved in the political process. I know
Yes.
it's tough now to say that, but as a young person, I am dedicated to doing all I can and everything I can, not only for my country, but for the world at large, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so there's this current and tireless um, uh, 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 effort that we have to make to ensure that the political systems are improved, that it's not no more the big boys club or the old boys club, but everyone can have a ticket to be able to help their society, to advocate for changes in their communities. And so everyone can sit at the table of improvement and sustainability for the future of humanity.
Colin
And so
Haynes
that's
for
it.
president. Make it so. Speak it into
I,
existence. Let's have
I
it.
cannot be president of the United States.
Oh, well, I'm sure.
I wasn't born here. This is a constitutional provision.
Minor detail, it's fine. I mean, at the rate things are going, I mean, maybe we'll change that. I mean, for God's sake, could it get
Well, hey,
worse?
call me when it does. I'll be
Okay,
ready.
we'll be dead, but that's fine. Okay, so do you feel like talking about the DNC? I do not. We can if you want to. I just, I haven't really been
What's your concerns? I'm interested to know
um where should I start? I'm not going to give Kamala too much because I know there's a lot and I don't really want to contribute to that in a negative way. So I will table that. My concern is that the Democratic Party has no plan. That's it. That's the tweet. They have no plan. They don't have any long-term plan. They're really just living like, election to election, as opposed to what can we do long-term to not only have the candidate of our choosing, quote unquote, elected, but how do we ensure that that's the best person that we found? How can we ensure that we are thinking of policies that are not just for the benefit of businesses and corporations, but are actually going to lead to a more sustainable future? How do we have a just transition away from coal? How do we do that? You know, Hillary Clinton made the fool ass mistake of basically telling coal miners she was going to put them out of work, which pretty much put the nail in her coffin for them. And there's a lot of, I just feel like Joe Biden and his dentures didn't quite do all that they needed to do to secure me and my vote. He literally just came on TV like, I mean, if you don't vote for me, you're not Black. And Barack Obama, thank you all very much for coming. God bless you. Good night. And it's like, I need something more from you than this. I need to you know, because I've seen your career, and I've seen Kamala's career, and I'm concerned that that the Democratic Party is simply rewarding career politicians and not necessarily looking toward who can do the best damn job. That's my concern. I don't like feeling like I don't have a choice. And then when I voice my concern, I hear, Rick, we have to do it. Do you want 4 more years of Trump? And it's like, well, girl, I mean, no. But I mean, if you tell me either it's drink milk, though you're lactose intolerant, or drink this God knows what mess that I made, like goat, whatever. It's just, you're telling me that I don't have a choice. I can either get diarrhea or not. And it's like, well, of course I'm not going to choose to have diarrhea, but I would also like to have a say in my alternative. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, definitely. And you know what? Guess what?
What?
I think that, and I've heard people say that, they like to see what the plans are, particularly when it comes to Black Lives Matters.
Yes.
We've had this issue from president to president. A Black president didn't solve it,
Nope.
obviously.
Mm-mm.
And what it does from time to time, it probably suppresses it for a while until it rears its ugly head back again, which was the last 5 years, right? So what I'd like to see happen is there be a clear plan in how we're going to get rid of some of the institutional racism,
Yes.
some of the institutional deficiencies. And like I said, COVID shows us that it has shocked some of these same barriers. Talk about race, COVID affect race. Talk about economy, COVID has affected economy.
Yep.
Talk about social life, COVID has affected. Talk about politics, COVID has affected it.
Yep.
Right? So now we've had a crossroads where we realize that the system of this republic has been grossly flawed for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
And we don't need politicians just to come and sweet talk us, right? And to tell us nice platitudes about America and the greatness of it. Now, one of the great things about America, and I truly believe in this, right? I truly believe in the first, and here there's some paradox in it, all right?
Okay.
So the founding fathers wrote in the preamble of the Constitution in order to form a more perfect union for the United States of America.
Mm-hmm.
So it means that it wasn't perfect.
Yes.
And what it means, it has to become improved every time.
Yes.
And it also shows that throughout ages, throughout society, throughout time, certain things show the union was very imperfect. And we move a little closer. Not saying we've eradicated, we're far from it yet.
Yeah.
But it has got better. So we were slaves, we're no longer slaves. Then we didn't have rights, we get some rights. Then we couldn't vote, we can vote now. But still there's much more to be done for voting, right?
So much.
Right. We weren't at the economic, social, political ladder. We've been able to climb those ladders, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I would like to see a plan to how do we actually improve upon that? How do we make the union more perfect? How do we tackle these areas? How do we tackle these inequities, these injustices to improve our society, right? I do believe also that the founding fathers did not know what they were writing in this republic.
Hell no.
they were thinking that, all men are created equal, just, us white men. But little did they ever know that these things became actually what they were. It
Yeah.
actually dawned on somebody who's black. Well, wait, if it says all men are created equal, why am I not equal?
Right.
Oh, let's start a riot. Let's start. Let's start,
Yeah.
and that's what I'm gonna tell you. That's what you've got to love about America. Another thing you've got to love about this country, and as an immigrant, I mean, you've heard all the immigrants say it, it's a place where you can come to, and it's a society that has a system in place, right?
Mm-hmm.
We come from societies that don't have great systems,
Mm-hmm.
that don't have great institutions,
Mm-hmm.
right? The president of the United States is not the most powerful person. Well, he's not the authoritarian of the state.
Right.
In our country, the president is pretty much the authoritarian. He can know everything. If you go to the bathroom, he knows as well. And so what we have to do is we have to, as a nation, we've been able to provide, people who've come from other places to have opportunities, opportunities that they wouldn't have had otherwise. At 32 years old, I could not imagine of having some kind of success that I have now. Being able to own a home, being able to build another home in my home country, and to be able to live a decent life. And I do feel though that there's more to be done on immigration. I feel that there's more to be done. But like I said, I want to see what those plans are. And what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to read the Democratic platform this time. And I'm going to see what's in there for me, because I've always been a voter that's been driven by policy. I'm an international relations, I'm an international politics degree guy. So I'm not voting because, proverbially, I don't want the other person. So this was also a conversation we had recently, about people having fear that the PDP will come into power because of their past history, right? So you were trying to fearmonger people into voting for the coalition because you didn't want the PPP in power. But when I look at the coalition plans and I looked at the PPP plans, the PPP has the better plans. They show me how they can grow jobs, or they can improve things. And so, I said, hey, we can't vote based on just a fear. Because if we vote for the other guy based on fear, the other guys will say, well, I won. I don't have to do anything.
Right.
Because
I won. Yes.
I just won. Right.
Yes. Yes, that is exactly. Thank you. You're like very articulate, not like in a stupid, condescending, like white man way. I mean it. You are able to articulate how I feel and what I'm trying to say instead of, being like, rah, 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 rah. It's just very calm and even keel. And I appreciate that. Now, as we're closing out, are there any shout outs that you want to give? How can people get a hold of you if they want to help you get your campaign for president set up? How can they do that?
Well, as part of my document I sent to you, and I'm sure you're probably going to see it.
I did.
I've given you my Facebook, my Twitter, my email. It's colinhayes@gmail.com. Yeah, I do take fan mail. And I would like to give a shout out to first important person, my mom. She's been my source of inspiration. She's raised me. Single mother again. There's not a great story of great Americans who've had single mother, Kamala Harris, and for being supportive, for believing in me along the step of every way. For my family and my friends who've always stuck beside me. And in my aspirations and my dream, when I came to this country, my dream was to come here to get an education and to go back to Guyana. And I still believe in that dream. And it hasn't been as successful as it is. It's been a tough road. I mean, it's not always been the smiles that I have on my face. It's been some really tough times. It's been a lot of disappointment I've been through in getting here. But I still persevere. I still have hope, and I want to be able to return back to my homeland and serve. That's all I ever wanted to do, and I'm seeing to have that opportunity very soon, hopefully.
Hopefully. That's really excellent. And you know, Colin, thank you for agreeing to be on the show. I know it was your first time, but this was just such a rich conversation, so much information and knowledge. And, you know, I just really appreciate you taking the time to be on the show. My shout out to Guyana. Y'all are out here producing champions. How about that?
Thank you so much. And when you have this podcast available, I'd like to get a link to the copy to share.
Yeah.
Because you know, I'd like to, and also we have to do the brunch thing.
Oh God. Oh yes. I mean, yes, we have to go to brunch. I'm probably gonna cry. So you may want to be somewhere else when that happens, but I'm just gonna let emotions just kind of come out. Like mimosas.
I'll just
you know?
I'll just walk with some extra Kleenex.
Okay.